Chapter 13, Family Myths. This is the section in the FIS where you take the stories or tales that you have heard about your family and write them down. Up until this point in the system, you have been dealing with observable facts, facts that are concrete, like dates of birth and death, places lived, and names of relatives, both near and distant. When I use the term myths, I mean those stories that are passed down from one generation to another. Tales that you have heard about your parents, your grandparents, or your great-grandparents. Some of the stories are true, and some are not. There are two general types of family myths. The first is the myth of how the family perceives itself. The second type consists of those unsubstantiated stories that exist in every family that are not necessarily fact, but add richness and a certain color to the family history. Alcoholic families abound with family myths. A more detailed description of the two types of family myths follows. The first type of myth is how the family behaves and how the family perceives itself. The basic myth of the alcoholic family is that it is normal. Alcoholic families try to hide their sometimes bizarre behavioral episodes from the world by creating the myth of being normal. This appearance of being normal is important to the family system. There is a fear of being found out, and that if found out, then someone or something will try to change the system. Some of the more common myths that most alcoholic families have are: all families are the same as us. We are normal. Talking about what happens in the family will just make it worse. Someday things will get better. We, the family, will always be there whenever you need us. We may fight a lot, but we really stick together through thick and thin. We always tell the truth and hold honesty as a high value. It's okay to lie to others outside the family. They don't understand us anyway. These are just some of the family myths that alcoholic families have. A former client, Ann Taylor, had a family myth that was, the Taylor women are strong women and are really in control. In reality, the Taylor women were sick codependents and untreated ACAs. They all married alcoholics and they spent their lives trying to control them. Strong was substituted in this family myth for being emotionally shut down. See if you can list some of your own family myths. As you work in other sections of the FIS, you may wish to return to this section and add additional information as you remember more and more about your family myths. The other type of family myth is more akin to the legend. Every family has one or more stories in its history that takes a larger-than-life proportion. Stories such as having an ancestor who was an exiled prince or princess abound. Stories of ancestors who single-handedly won the Indian Wars or who were Indian chiefs are some of the many myths that families have. Do you have an Indian princess in your family history? Any pirates or other villains? How about being related to the Tsar of Russia? Many family myths have a basis in fact. Over the years, the facts have been embellished somewhat. This makes for good storytelling. Myths add color and character to the family history. There is nothing wrong with them, and they are interesting to tell and to hear. At one workshop that I conducted, two people who were unrelated and did not know each other before the workshop had the same legendary figure in their family history, Daniel Boone. As they compared their family histories, it also became apparent that it would have been impossible for Daniel Boone to belong to both families. In fact, it was improbable that the legendary figure was part of either family, but both clients grew up with this belief. Family myths can also revolve around a family character, some family member who has done eccentric things and always seems to come out of the experience okay, if not somewhat bedraggled. You might have a great Uncle Charlie who is remembered for drinking a bit and getting into trouble. One thing is certain. If your family is still talking about Great Uncle Charlie's drinking 40 years later, then Great Uncle Charlie was an alcoholic. One ACA had a maternal grandmother who raised 6 children by herself during the Depression. At least 2 of her husbands were alcoholic. Part of her story was that in order to live rent-free, she would take jobs as building superintendent, with the agreement that she would keep the building clean. Being of Scandinavian descent, which many people associated with cleanliness, she had no trouble finding jobs. Since she had to work at other jobs to buy food, she just never got around to cleaning the buildings, which included, during the winter, taking out the ashes from the furnaces. She would let the basement of the building fill up with ashes and then, with all her children, move to the other side of the city, taking another job as building superintendent. The story may or may not be true. It does, however, make for good telling around the dinner table at Christmas time, before the fighting starts. Many adult children are so alienated from their families that they cannot remember any family myths. They have blocked off much of their family history because of the pain of growing up in an alcoholic system. If you are one of those who cannot remember any family myths, ask your family members what they can remember. If you cannot remember any family myths, don't be discouraged. Many ACAs have memory loss surrounding their childhood. Also, alcoholic families don't get very high scores in clear communication, and the fact is that you may not have heard any family myths. As you work through the system, some myths about your family will, in all likelihood, return to your memory. If this happens, then return to this section and write them down. Remember that this section is about myths. The stories don't have to be factual and can and will be rather outlandish. Nothing is too silly for this section. So be free with your tall tale telling. Now, go ahead and make some entries into this section, remembering to date the entries. Have fun.